So an initiative, this is the basics. Initiative is a proposed law by the sponsors of the petition. So when they file their application, they actually submit a copy of their proposed language that will be adopted. Conversely, as you all might know, a referenda is a referring to the people an existing law. Now, a referendum is almost exclusively used to repeal a law. No one really refers a law they like. But the key is, a referenda is presenting an existing law for the voters' approval or rejection. So voters, when they are going to the ballot box, they're not being asked, do you want to repeal this law? They're being asked, here is the law, do you approve it or reject it? And if they approve it, the law becomes on the books and it goes into effect. So that's the big difference between the two. Let's go through the administrative process overview. As Craig mentioned, we have this handout. It's about 10 pages long. There's about 5 pages for initiatives and 5 pages for referendum. We could have made it longer. Basically, as you go through the process, this is a good reference tool for you to use, but we always suggest look to the code and make sure that you're complying with all the elements of code. So initiatives are in Title 20A, Chapter 7, Part 5, and referendums are in Part 6. So just read through that as you begin this process. Now, the first key step for municipalities and counties is preparation. And the first is, we've talked a little bit about participation areas, and Ryan will discuss more of those in depth about how you can create those with the county. But those go into effect January 1st of 2020. And what was said earlier is it's a very good idea to have those in place prior to it becoming effective. That way you don't need to scramble and create areas when an initiative or referendum is filed. Another thing that you want to know and be aware of are signature thresholds. Representative Daw mentioned that the signature thresholds change from presidential or votes cast for president to active voters. This will change on January 1st every other year, I believe, and so it will change frequently. And so every January 1st, you'll want to contact, if you're a municipality, contact your county clerk and say, hey, how many active voters do we have in my municipality? And you'll base those numbers off that number. The next is the application phase. This referenda have to be filed within 7 calendar days of the law being passed. But initiatives are a little bit more unpredictable. They can occur at any time. So you may want to have an application on hand if you'd like, but just be aware that they may be coming in. The application requires a few things, and it differs on referendum and initiatives. They both have to include 5 sponsors. It depends. Some initiatives, they have to be registered voters. Referendums, they have to be residents. And they have to have voted in Utah within a certain number of years. For initiatives, they have to include the text of the law, and they have to include certain statements, such as if it increases taxes, then it has to include a prescribed kind of boilerplate language that the state statute provides. If it's a referendum, then they have to provide the full text of the local law being referred. Now, if there is no text of the local law, there is a caveat where they can provide a description of the act that is being referred. So the application is received by the local clerk. And in most cases, or in all cases, the municipal process is done through the local clerk, and the county process is done from the county clerk. The only exception is that verification and signatures are submitted to the county clerk regardless of what type of petition. But generally, the municipal clerk will be very heavily involved with municipal initiatives and referenda. So you get the application, and what we start is kind of a 20-day period that's been alluded to. And this is a busy time for municipalities because there's 4 things that you need to be doing, and sponsors will be doing, and your local legislative body will be included as well. The first is the drafting of a fiscal and legal impact statement. And that's about a statement that the state law says you need to analyze about 6 or 7 things on how this law or repeal of this law will affect the city or the fiscal impact of the municipality. The budget officer and the local attorney do that in conjunction with each other. The second thing, what we've mentioned, is referability. Is the municipality or county takes the time, does legal analysis, and determines can they do this initiative or can they refer this law? And the statute provides various kinds of standards in which you have to evaluate it. The third thing is the preparation of a proposition information pamphlet. This pamphlet will be sent out to voters assuming it is referable after this 20-day period, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. But essentially, the proposition pamphlet will include the fiscal and legal analysis, arguments from the sponsors, an argument from the local government, if they so choose, and the text of the proposal. The fourth is a ballot title. The ballot title is 100 words that will be directly placed on the ballot. So if you voted in 2018, when you read that statement for Propositions 2, 3, and 4, that included the ballot title, and it's similar for local initiatives and referenda. There are instances which sponsors can take the municipality to court, especially for the ballot title and referability, if they believe, well, one, for the ballot title, if it's unfair or it creates bias, or so there are some avenues that sponsors can use to challenge the municipality or county's decisions on these 4 issues. So it's a busy 20 days for your city. The clerk, the attorney, the budget officer, they will have to be working in tandem together to make sure that you meet these deadlines. So if we assume that the initiative or referendum is referable, that is, it's legally allowed to proceed, then you'll provide the petition to sponsors. And the petition consists of several items. It usually has a cover page, a signature page. It also has to include a copy of the proposition information pamphlet, which includes the fiscal and legal impact statement. So the local clerk will provide that to the sponsors after it's deemed referable. And at this time, you'll also be sending out the proposition information pamphlet through various means. If you see on the checklist, county and municipalities distribute it to voters in different ways, so you can refer to that if you'd like. And so petition sponsors get the petition. They're great, we're ready to go. And they have a certain amount of time to collect those petition signatures. Now, before we get to verification, referenda have 45 days in most cases to submit signatures, all petition signatures. And initiatives have either April 15th or 316 days. I think it's before the election. I have to double check.
It's the later of the 315 days from the date they applied.
Correct.
Or April 15th.
Correct. So it was 316 days after they applied or April 15th, whichever comes soonest. Now, we'll go into this a little bit more detail, but for local referendum, a question.
Who holds the responsibility for training or educating these sponsors on how to go about their business?
Okay, so, so that's actually a good question, because HB 119 actually tells my office, the Lieutenant Governor's office, to create instructions for petitioners. So right now, in fact, we'll publish it this afternoon after I'm done here, and it'll have a comprehensive set of instructions for initiative and referendum sponsors that you can refer them to. Now, it won't cover every aspect. I'm sure they'll have more questions, and questions perhaps unique to your municipality and county. Generally, it's a good idea to designate a point of contact in your municipality. That's what we do at our office. It could be an attorney or a clerk, if the sponsors need guidance or instructions, that you can just channel it through that one individual. Now, another thing, I mentioned that referenda have to turn in their signatures 45 days after that signature period begins. Now, there's a caveat, though, and we mentioned it a little bit earlier, is they have to submit a digital copy or an image of the petition packet within 7 days after it first being signed. So there's kind of a rolling deadline of 7 days after petition packet's been signed, but then the great cutoff is that 45-day deadline. Now, like I mentioned before, the process usually goes through the municipal clerk for all things, but when it comes to verifying signatures and signature removal statements, this all goes through the county clerk. And so if you're a municipality, it's always a good idea to give your county clerk a heads up that this is coming. And the county clerk will use standards provided in code to determine whether a signature is valid or not. And they do this all through our online or our database. And so they'll enter in a signature, they'll compare it, and the database will tally valid signatures, invalid signatures, et cetera. And the clerk will be able to provide municipal clerks with a nice report that says these are the number of verified signatures. Right now it's a little odd. The code kind of contemplates that all of this done is manually. The counting is done by hand, but it's done digitally at this point. So the county clerk verifies signatures. Those deadlines depend whether it's an initiative or referendum. Referendum, county clerks have to do it within 30 days of the packets being submitted. Initiatives, they have a little bit more time. And then what will happen is for municipal initiatives and referenda, the county clerk will return all the packets to the local clerk or the municipal clerk and say, this is your number of verified signatures. The local clerk will tally, I don't know how you do that, but look at the spreadsheet, and then the clerk will determine if it meets the signature requirement, and they'll declare the petition as sufficient or insufficient and notify the sponsors. This is where the initiative and referenda kind of diverge a little bit. The next step is a little bit different. So for initiatives, the clerk will take it to the local legislative body. And the local legislative body has a few options when they receive it, and they have 30 days to act or not to act. They can either adopt the law and not refer it to the people. They can adopt the law and still refer it to the people. They can reject the law and it still goes on the ballot, or they can take no action. Another thing they can do is adopt a competing law and put it on the ballot as well. Referenda is a little bit different. It doesn't contemplate any action by the local legislative body. It just says that the law is placed on hold until the voters approve or reject it at the next election. So what happens is it's now on the ballot, it's qualified. We're going to take our proposition information pamphlet and add rebuttal arguments to it. So if the sponsors wrote something, and this referendum is fantastic, and the city just hates it, and they wrote an argument against it, they have an opportunity then to write a rebuttal argument. That's 250 words. They submit those to the local clerk, and the clerk sends out yet another pamphlet called the voter information pamphlet. This is actually not changed from previous years. It's been modified, but ballot propositions have always had a voter information pamphlet. But now you're just going to take the proposition pamphlet and add those rebuttal arguments. Next is your election. Pretty straightforward. And then canvassing, which is certifying the election results. Yes, Marilyn.
Since we've had so much fun with referendums in Tooele lately, these pamphlets, do they have to be mailed out to each resident? Can they be put in the paper? Can we do like the state does and send out a fly or a postcard that says if you want one, let us know? It's on our website. What do we do?
Yes. So Ryan will be covering that right after me, but you are correct.
Sorry, Ryan. Just
No. You're correct. If it's cost prohibitive to send out a pamphlet to all registered voters, you do have an option to send out a pre-addressed postcard in which a voter can request the voter information pamphlet, or you can direct them to a website where they can view it. That's what we do at the state, and it does save money. So depending on your size, it may be a viable option for you. Now with the canvas, there are a few things you do differently for initiatives and referenda. You'll do it normally. Your board of canvassers will meet. They'll canvass, your candidates on the ballot, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you have a bond. But what they'll do for initiatives and referenda is they'll look at the votes for and against, and they'll issue a proclamation immediately after the canvass is done that says, this passed, it becomes law, or something to the opposite effect. So there is a proclamation separate from the canvass that happens immediately after. One last thing, and this is not the case for referenda, but it is for initiatives. For initiatives, the budget officer will conduct one last fiscal impact estimate. Now, if the estimate exceeds a certain threshold from the initial estimate in step 3, the local legislative body has a couple options. They can amend it, they can repeal it, or they can notify the voters that they can file another initiative to change it. So that's an interesting thing. So this is a really high-level overview. As you can see in your checklist, it goes into great detail. Consult the code. Before I end, and Ryan gets up here to explain this further, does anyone have any questions about this general process? Yes?
When the original pamphlet is sent out in step 3, or I guess my question is does step 3 require mailing and or postcards to everybody as well, or is it just step whatever, step 8? Step 8.
I think Ryan will take that.
Okay.
On that one. But good question. Any other questions? Okay, well, I will turn it over to Ryan.
My name is Ryan Cowley, and I'm the Elections Director for Weber County, and it's good to be here this afternoon. This bill, as was mentioned by the previous group, got a lot of input from a lot of different groups. And overall, I really like how the bill ended up. It's not perfect as you get into this and go through these processes. Take note of things that need to be fixed or whatnot, because it's not a perfect process, but we are in a much better position, both as cities and counties, because of it. This is one of the rare exceptions in a bill where we actually, as county clerks, actually took on more responsibility than what we normally do. So in laws, when they're usually passed, everybody's trying to take away and not take on as much responsibility. This is an area where we actually took on more as clerks just to better the process. And that's really been the goal, I think, of everybody who's involved in this bill in getting it there, is just to make it a fair process that has clear rules for everybody to follow, and it's not so darn confusing for everybody, both the cities and the counties and the people who are trying to do a petition. This was mentioned by Wade, the voter participation areas. Those need to be created by January 1st. And as has been alluded to, don't make this a political football. Don't wait until you have a referenda or an initiative to create these. I would recommend being proactive in doing this long before you ever have something that you're dealing with in your city or your county, because if you wait, this really will become a political football and a contentious issue. So when you do this, they're going to be created into 4 or 8 zones, depending on the size of your city or your county. And the rules surrounding these participation areas are that they have to be contiguous, compact, and substantially equal. Now, I think one of the unfortunate things with this is it really does use a lot of language that ties it to districts like we use for congressional districts and things like that. I think that's unfortunate because we're really talking about something very different. We're not talking about voting zones. We're talking about access to the ballot. And so I think it's a little bit unfortunate that some of that language mirrors the districts, but it is what it is. So contiguous means that they are not separated. So you can't have part of an area of your city in one area and another part in another area and say, okay, this is one zone, these two areas that are not connected. And then compact means you can't create like little thin areas and say, okay, I'm going to make this little street to bridge the gap between those two. But it's also, in terms of redistricting, it also means that you're putting like people with like people. So if there's different areas of your city that are very diverse and different, you're going to want to put as much as you can those people in like areas. And then lastly, substantially equal in population. There's very different standards for a congressional seat, which is typically 1%. With state legislative districts, it's usually within 10%. There is really no standard here. So work with your attorneys to have them determine what substantially equal level they're comfortable with. And as was alluded to earlier, this is going to be kind of a 2-year stopgap. So this has to be in place by January of this year. But we do have the census coming up, and the county clerks will work with the counties to recreate precincts. And since this is a new concept, our precincts that were drawn don't really anticipate this. So there may be some areas where you can't really get that down to where it's substantially equal. There may be a lot broader deviation than you're really comfortable with, and we'll just have to live with that for a couple of years. And then when we do the redistricting, we can do that with this in mind so that we can make it so that there are more opportunities to make this be a much more substantially equal kind of a thing. And this was mentioned by Wade, 5th and 6th class counties are exempt, so are 5th class cities and towns, and as well as those cities or counties that use districts for their councils. They can either create their own participation areas or they can use their existing areas that they have created. So I just want to highlight just a couple of areas that change significantly in the signature gathering process. So basically the way that it'll work is once there's a law passed or a group files an initiative with a city, the responsibility with the city recorder and with the city will go up until it's created the packets, the petition packets. Then once those are out for signature gathering, those will be turned into the county clerk now. So those won't go back to the city at all. They'll go directly to the county clerk. We'll verify the signatures, and then we'll give that back to the cities at that point, like Derek mentioned, basically with a report that says, hey, here's what counted, here's what didn't. So with referenda, the signatures changed quite a bit. So now it's a rolling time period, which we as clerks absolutely love. Because otherwise everybody would wait till the 45th day and then they come in and hand those to us, and then you'd have, I think it was 15 days to verify all of those signatures. And so it was really tough on us to get all of that done in a timely manner. Now basically after the first signature in a packet is collected, the collectors have to go out and turn those back into us within 7 days. So if it's not turned in within 7 days, that signature doesn't count. So there's a strong incentive to do that. Now, we realize that 7 days can be a little bit of a burden, especially in counties. You know, there's some counties where it's a couple of hours from one part of the county into the county seat. So to accommodate that, we do allow them to submit an electronic copy of that, and it has to be legible. That's in the code. So within 7 days of a signature, they have to turn that into us, and we can start verifying those signatures as they come in. Late packets, as I mentioned, they cannot be accepted, and removals follow the same process. So if you want to have your signature removed from a referenda petition, that has to be done within 7 days of signing the form in order to do it. And it also takes out the requirement that it has to be notarized. Before it had to be notarized, and now it doesn't, but it does have to match the voter's signature that's on file.
How do I know when they signed it? Is there a place for them to put a date?
It does require the date, and it does require the verifier, the person who signs the end of the packet. It does require them to sign an affidavit saying that those were all signed on the date that they say that they were signed.
So are the packets not 50 pages anymore?
They can be. They can be. I think it can be up to 50 different pages. It doesn't have to have 50, but it can be up to 50. But it will require now a new field that has the date that it was signed.
How are you going to squeeze that on with what's already there?
Oh, it outlines right down to the margin, so yeah, it'll be a tight fit, but that is one of the requirements. And then, like I said, the best part for us as clerks is we get to start verifying those immediately, and we are also required to give out reports to both the petitioners and if there's other groups Say a developer is on one side and you have the petitioners, we're required to give out reports that show who has signed that petition, and we're to do that, within I can't remember the exact term that it uses in the bill, but basically, an immediate time frame, so that they can go out and see who has signed and get the signatures that they need. So the proposition information pamphlet, this is a brand new concept in this bill, and this is one of the parts that I actually love the most about this bill, because what it really does is it allows the cities and counties to get information to the people signing the petition. That's always been one of the frustrations with petitions, is people can basically put whatever they want to in their application, and then it really becomes kind of a one-sided argument. What this does is it brings a balance to it. So you have the for and the against arguments. It's basically just like the voter information pamphlet. So it'll have for and against arguments, so that's all out there. It'll have a copy of either the proposed law or the law that's being referred. It will also have the legal analysis, and it will also have the fiscal impact. So that's a lot of information, but it's all there. So if somebody wants to take the time to read it, all of that information will be included with the packets, rather than just a quick little line that has whatever was on the application. Oh, and it will also have the application letter. So there is a lot of information that's in there. So the PIP is created during that 20-day pause, and then it has to be published within 10 days after that. There is an opportunity where both the petitioners and the legislative body can revise their statement. So it's within basically 10 days of that legislative pause, or the administrative pause ending, then the PIP will be created from there. And when you're creating arguments with the cities or counties, there's a preference given to the side of the legislative body that's on the prevailing side. So if an ordinance passed or something like that was being referred, then the legislative body can do the for argument, but it would be somebody who's on the side that voted yes for the ordinance to pass that would have preference for creating that for argument. So you couldn't have, a 3-2 decision and one of the two writing the for argument, which is kind of a subtle nuance, but it is an important one, that the prevailing side be given that opportunity to write that for argument. Okay, and then how do you get there's a question back here of how do you get out the proposition information pamphlet. Basically, there's a few ways that you can do that, and Representative Daw didn't really care what methods were used, as long as there's a good faith effort to really get that information out there. And it's important that we push that out to our citizens. So email is a big priority. Now, there's a big difference in kind of emails, as we talked through this, between the cities and the counties. The cities have a lot better email lists than what we do, either through rec programs or there's a lot of different ways that cities can collect emails. But basically, you can email that out to all of the residents that you have an email address on file. Now, the counties are basically the stewards of the voter registration database. And with voter registration, we also have a field in there for emails. Now, that email address is a protected field. And so because of that little nuance of it being a protected field, we didn't want to worry about issues between the cities using that and the counties. So the cities can't use the voter registration email address, but the counties can. But the cities tend to have better email addresses anyway because of those other programs and services that they're providing. So in addition to sending it out by email, you're also required to put it on the public notice website and on your homepage. And then cities also have the option of putting it in with the newsletter, utility bills, things like that. They can also put a link on their website to the PIP, but as was mentioned before, always make sure that you're granting equal access. So if you're putting a link to the arguments, make sure that you just include the full PIP and not just like the 4 arguments or something like that. So just make sure that you're linking to the full document that's been created. So that's all I have on that. Are there any questions, Derek and I? We kind of planned a little bit shorter presentation, anticipating that there would be some questions and things like that. So feel free to shoot questions our way.
I have a question about information beyond the PIP. Is there any kind of limitation on parties producing or distributing propaganda for their position or against the other party's position outside of the PIP.
So, just to clarify, I guess, just your mic. Really, there are restrictions. I think I'm kind of reading between the lines here. And there are no restrictions, at least in the state code, of what people can and cannot say unless they willfully lie. They know it's incorrect and they lie. We get this kind of complaint a lot here at the state elections office, but really there's really nothing, at least my office can do, I don't know if the county clerks can do it, to really step in and say, hey, you said something incorrect, you need to fix it. We just don't have authority. I don't know if that addresses your question at all. Now, when it comes to this new HB 419, what Representative Daw and Cameron were talking about is that the city does have an opportunity to, address questions that may come their way. So if a voter says, hey, I heard X, is this true? Then the city would be enabled to say, no, this is our research, this is what we find. So cities do have an opportunity, but it's difficult when a group is out there saying stuff, there's not much you can really do.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about the fiscal analysis and what that should consider, so that as clerks working with our budget officer, how we can make sure they're kind of hitting all their notes, especially when we have newer budget officers or things like that?
Sure.
What should this look like?
I don't have it off the top of my head, but if you look at the code section, 602.5 and 502.5, it does prescribe a list of things that the analysis should include. And so there's very little room for interpretation of what should the analysis contain. And so if you just take a look at this code section, it's pretty self-explanatory. That's my advice.
Is there any particular form that the PIP needs to be in? Like, I know it's very specific when you're talking about the referendum packet, margins, as you mentioned, and everything like that. What about the PIP?
Good question. No, there is no particular formatting that you need to follow. My understanding is that you have to include one thing after another, so it has to go in a certain order, but as far as formatting, you can take a liberal interpretation of that. Well, if you have any more questions, please do go through this checklist. Like I said, if you do receive an application, the first thing is to look at this checklist and start reading through those parts and those sections in state code. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to my office, the Lieutenant Governor's office. Our generic email is elections@utah.gov. We're happy to help in any way we can.
And one thing I would really like to add as we kind of wrap this up is the county clerks have a really strong working relationship with each other, and we're working hard on the voter participation areas in particular. We've been able to take our voting precincts and pull out census data to pull out the populations. So we've been able to do that. I live in Roy, so I've gone through and I've done Roy, and I also just kind of went through a mock example with North Ogden to kind of do it. And so this is something that's very doable, and I'm working on putting together some step-by-step instructions that we'll be getting to your county clerks that they can then use through their GIS and things like that to be able to give you exactly what you need to be able to create those participation zones. And then through this process as well, if you have questions or anything like that, I know Derek's office is always great. When we have questions, that's where we run. And then, but your county clerks also will always be a good asset and a good resource. So partner with them early in this process. If it looks like you're going to have a referenda, or it looks like you're going to have an initiative, contact them early, reach out to them. We'll have a lot of checklists, a lot of information. I always put together a spreadsheet that I give to our cities when they go through this that just lists all the different code sections, a summary of what it is that they need to do, and also a timeline of deadlines, so they can just go through and basically check off where they're at in this process. So that would be my hope is, we work together so well as cities and counties So just reach out early and know that you're not alone in this process, and there are people that can help you through, because this bill is highly technical. There's 78 major areas that this bill changed, and those are just the things from my perspective that I saw, so there's probably more in it than that. But it is a massive bill, and it seems like a huge undertaking, and when you get this, sometimes it is referred to as a swear word, but I actually take umbrage to that, because this is actually the citizen's right. It's a constitutional right under the state constitution that they have co-equal legislative power with the legislature and the legislative body, and they also have a constitutional right to challenge laws that are passed by the municipalities. And so it's something that we can help them through. It's not pleasant sometimes, and it's not fun, but that is a very important right that the citizens of Utah have. And so it is our duty to do that with due diligence and follow the law and help them through that process.
Super. Thank you to these gentlemen.